Well, I have a problem in that two people would like to start early because they have to go to bed early and get up very early. Two people would like to keep it this late or have it a little later because those two people aren't even here because they take appointments after people get off of work. I don't know what to do. We could ping-pong back and forth between two times, but that would be just too crazy, I think. Anybody have any ideas? How do people feel about, who'd like to start at 7 instead of 7:30? How many people would like to do that?
I'd like to do 7:30.
Okay. All right.
And I think people who don't drive get driven to you and go down.
Well, how do you feel about 7 or 7:30? Which?
I'm flexible. Fine with me.
All right, let's try 7 o'clock next time, and let that be a starting time until that doesn't work out. Maybe it'll be no time. All right. Terrible notes. Do you need a pen? What?
Sorry, I got something on my head, so I got trying it on the floor.
Oh, okay. Well, we have voted to start at 7 next time, so you can pull in a half an hour late. Jerry, I think, is still working it, so he'll probably be here later. This is going to be a series of talks about mysticism and mystical philosophy. Mysticism is the practice of direct experience of spirit. Since spirit is universal, and since it transcends even the mind, when it is experienced directly, wakingly, the experience is ineffable. Which means at any time, if I quit talking, it may be because I don't know anything, or it may be because I know everything. Even when mystic seers do report things about the lower realms that are not universal, like the realms of feeling, emotion, and desire, or the realm of thought, or the ethers, or something like that, even then, their reports are very difficult. The experience just doesn't lend itself very well to communication. And our consciousness is so low, it's very hard to tell us that. Part of the problem is due to our communicative weakness. We're very young and very incapable, and we're egoistic. To a large extent, we don't care to hear others, or we want to say things only the way we want to say things without taking another person into account. And on top of that, we're filled with assumptions. And most of those assumptions are the consequence of materialistic illusion. It becomes a question of why even study mysticism if it's so difficult to experience and even more difficult to convey and understand. Well, I'm not a seer, but even the little hints in the direction of experience that I've had and the information from people who have had spiritual experiences are both so good, I can't see studying or doing anything else. It's worth every bit of the effort of trying to understand. No matter how faint, even if it is by reflection, no matter how faint the experience of the source of all the intents and purpose behind existence is rich beyond our present conceptions, and it's worth everything we can put into it. So once we've had a little taste of honey like that, no matter how weak the taste, we're hooked. And we're hooked on that quest of trying to unite with Spirit. So the purpose of these talks is to share. We all faint and flag and fail in our endeavors towards spirituality, and hopefully these talks will provide encouragement or resume interest or do something in that way. That's the primary purpose of the talks, is to share. Secondary purpose is to share in another way. I spend a lot of time digging, both within myself and within studies, and I pick up things along the way. And it's like you've ever seen young kids with guitars. They like to play around, and then they pick up a sound that they've heard on a record or something like that, and they get together and they show each other what they've picked up. And it's in that spirit that the talks are offered. Even though I'm the one doing the talking, it could just about be anybody in the room doing the talking. All we need to do, I've had talks with everyone here, and the interactions with them are such that, wow, I say these people have something that is a genuine experience. And even though I'm doing the talking, I'll try to not be self-assertive as an authority or anything like that, because I find the self-assertion in authoritative manner, I find that increasingly repulsive and very difficult for me. Now, because mystical endeavor has been going on for thousands and thousands of years, there are many schools of thought about mysticism, and many methods of applications, and many cultural vehicles for expressing mysticism. Some have proven fruitful and have helped people along the way. Others have proven even deadly or distracting. And the reason for this is because the material, no matter how pure it is at the font of creation, when it comes through humans, it's going to be changed. People are prone to error, and sometimes when you start having experiences and you're still filled with egoism, you can distort it. And you can turn it to be something opposite of what it was meant to be in the first place. So mysticism is sort of like a pure spring that is continuously putting out the water of life. Sometimes it has to go in old channels. Sometimes those channels dry up and new channels have to come out. But the water takes on things, it absorbs things or dissolves things along the way, and it's never as pure as when it first comes out of the spring. And so we have to be careful. All religions and most philosophies have sprung from the spring of mysticism. The beginnings of all things go back to the beginning of all creation. We can't work in the vehicle or in all of the vehicles that have ever been. Some of them are obsolete. Some of them we can't relate to. People change, and as we change, our outlooks change. We see things in a different way, and suddenly we have new capacities to see things as we couldn't see them before. And therefore, any vehicle that is to bring us the water of life has to be a new vehicle. In general, over the long run, we progress. We get better, and we're capable of doing more things. Even material philosophy believes in an evolution, even though their view of an evolution is that it is all an evolution of form, and it's couched in terms like random events and blind determinism, and it doesn't see the spiritual driving force behind evolution, or behind the creation that is evolutionary in its nature. There still is a recognition of progress. Similarly, mysticism, even though it springs from an eternal source, mysticism is evolving all of the time. In these talks, we are going to be using vehicles of mysticism. I'd forgive you if you brought Harry along. The vehicles of mystical expression that have been chosen, there are several reasons for them. And one is because it's almost inseparable for me. I have been imbued, and you might say marinated, in modern Western Christian mysticism, and so much so that they're a part of me. And that anything I do has to come through such a vehicle. A second reason is that I think that they're more appropriate for most people who have been influenced by Western culture. When we have a science that's based on doubt, or that's based on questioning everything, it's very different from the cultural outlook that people had thousands of years ago when mysticism was in its early stages. And a third reason why the vehicles that have been used or are going to be used in these talks have been selected is because they appear to be a very accurate portrayal of what we as humans really are and what our spiritual work is. The primary vehicles that will be influencing these talks, though it is not intended for them to be the purpose of these talks, are Christian mysticism in the form of Rosicrucianism, as expressed in the Rosicrucian Fellowship. The other vehicle that is a primary influence is anthroposophy, as developed by Rudolf Steiner. Both of these have had a strong influence on me, and they present a cultural vehicle and a mystical vehicle that is ideal for what we're trying to do. Both of these vehicles are Christian, but in the sense that I will be using them, it will not be a sectarian sense. That the concepts of a being called Christ are something that can be treated in a completely non-sectarian manner, and that is the way I will try to treat them. So this is not going to be any kind of indoctrination. and it's not going to be any proselytization or membership drive or anything like that. It's nice to share a movement with others, but unless that is founded in a common experience, and unless it is something that people have come to from their own conviction and from the integrity of their being, it's silly to think of it in any other way. I do realize that some of my very dearest friends that are here have chosen paths that are very similar, but perhaps not in all things perfectly congruent. But at the same time, they're not divergent, and because I love these people, I won't do anything that offends any of their views or anything like that. I don't think I have anything that would be offensive anyway. I think it's always important when discussing the ground rules and philosophies used, and things of that nature, that philosophy is a vehicle. Philosophy is not an end in itself. Philosophy helps us to point at reality. And it's the reality that counts. And the sooner that we can drop the philosophy and speak directly from reality, or to the degree from our own experience that we can speak, the more worthwhile what we have to say will be. Somebody pointed the picture or drew the picture of philosophy being something like a scaffold. It's necessary to build the building, but it's absolutely useless once the building is built. That the reality is there, and that's the important thing. The reality that mysticism addresses itself to is so universal and so much of love that it's kind of hard to not be harmonious about it anyway. Mysticism and our religion seem to have trouble with each other, but mystics never seem to, because the experience is very, very much the same. So beside trying to be a grand sharing and a grand encouragement to each other, the talks will obviously also constitute the, how would you say it, the grandiose and vainglorious speculations of Richard Koepsel, but I will try to rein I will try to rein that in a little bit, and I'll try to be extremely careful about what is an allusion to philosophy, what is common to all mysticism, what is speculation, and what is insight. Beside being a series of talks about mysticism, this is a series of talks about some of the plays of Shakespeare. And as soon as anyone hears the word Shakespeare, a whole bunch of questions arise. Like, why Shakespeare? Or, was Shakespeare a mystic? Or isn't it a little bit pretentious and hoity-toity and compromising to appeal to Shakespeare? Well, actually, pretension is exactly the opposite of the intent of these talks. Mysticism, dealing with the undifferentiated and unconditioned spiritual reality, is by its very nature aformal, which means it is by its very nature informal. And any attempt to crystallize it, any attempt to formalize it, is bound to end up in a crippling or a death. Pretension, like any other expression of pride or egoism, seems to form like a little glaze over our spiritual eye so that we can't see things clearly. We're a little bit removed. And though the obscuration formed by pretension or egoism appears to be subtle, and we say to ourselves, oh, we're so clear in our consciousness, it's enough to impede or distract us from direct spiritual experience, because if we were clear, if we were ready, Hamlet says, the readiness is the all. If we were clear and ready in our soul, there would be no reason why we wouldn't have an abundance of miracles or an abundance of spiritual experiences. So what we want is celerity and not celebrity. And Shakespeare is not being chosen for celebrity. Was Shakespeare a mystic? Maybe. There's considerable information to indicate that he was at least knowledgeable about mysticism and astrology and magic and aligned subjects. And one of the side effects of this course is we may add to that evidence. But whether he was a mystic or not is not the reason for using his plays, or to assume that he was a mystic. There's plenty of evidence to indicate that he was a lot of other things, such as a stoic, or an herbalist, or a heraldrist, or a falconer. You know, he seemed to know an awful lot from the inside about all of those things. The only way we'll ever know whether Shakespeare was a mystic is to unfold our own clairvoyance and to train it so that we can read the memory of nature and see for ourselves. Even though this is going to be a lot of secondhand information, it all goes back to direct experience. Besides, it doesn't really matter who he or she may have been. Whether it really was somebody named Shakespeare, or whether it was Bacon, or whether it was the Earl of Oxford, or whoever, doesn't make any difference. It doesn't matter whether he was more stoical, or more mystical, or more of a royalist, or more of whatever. For what we want to get at, those things aren't important. We don't need celebrity. We don't even need knowledge to justify the mystical life. The life and the truth that lives in it stands for itself. And that should be our primary intent. Well, now we start into another kind of introduction and review to try and get at why we're studying Shakespeare. We have to begin with our own experience. And we're talking about ourselves, and we're talking about each other. And what we see is something that we have a pretty sure experience about. We can see a substantial world around us. Something that is solid, something that is tangible, and even the rarer elements around us, the gaseous elements, we have experience directly of them. But we see in human beings, we see a discrete physical body. This body is separated from the general physical world. It's subject to the same laws as the general physical world, but each of us has taken some of the stuff of the physical world and we have made for ourselves a separate vehicle for experiencing the physical world, and we utilize the laws of this physical world right within our somatic existence. So in our physical existence, we are sort of like a little physical world. In some ways, this physical body is quite sophisticated. In fact, if you study physiology, you see it is amazingly sophisticated. Just taking stock of the senses, for example. A person under the right conditions can see a match struck at 20 miles. If you're elevated and it's perfectly clear, you can see a match struck at 20 miles. And you can smell 1 part per billion of something that's in the air. So it's pretty sophisticated. But there are a lot of forms in the physical world. There's this stand. It's separate from the physical world, but there's a difference. The stand, even though I can adjust it, really doesn't change. The human physical form changes. We see it from its conception or from its birth. It grows. And as it grows, it changes according to the inward and outward experience of its inhabitant. People get wrinkles generally throughout life. The physical body becomes harder and harder. But it's capable of growth. It's capable of change. In short, it is not like the stand. Mystics claim from direct experience that the physical body is suspended in a vital or etheric body, and that this vital body, or the stuff of energy, is what is responsible for propelling the physical body. Even if we just stand here and wave, if I stand here and wave my arms like an idiot. And that there is a whole world of energy. And that in the same way that we, as self-conscious beings, have taken the stuff, probably with assistance, of the dense physical world and have made a separate body, the energy and the vitality that allows us to grow and to change and to move and to do things didn't come from a vacuum either. We drew the energy from a general realm of energy that is suspended in the physical, and the physical is suspended in it. The concept of suspension is a very important concept for a mystical student to learn, to free him or herself from materialistic illusion. If we realize that we're not of the material world, but that we're suspended in it, that our body really is in life, it's much easier to keep from being attached to all the pains and sufferings and all the illusions that we have in the material world. If we take the conception of suspension so that our whole physical really is a precipitate of something higher and that it is sustained by something more than mere chemicals, we're one step closer to realizing the source from which all of this comes. So in the same way that the physical world is propelled through space, and it's suspended in space, it's floating along or being thrown along through space, in our own little way, each of us is suspended in an etheric realm, and the etheric body that each of us has, which causes the changes in the physical, is suspended in the physical. They are interpenetrating, and to the degree that they have a concentric interpenetration and a conscious realization of that concentric interpenetration, to that degree there is an awareness of the state of matter and the state of energy. So we're more than just stones, but we also know that we're more than just vegetables, because plants also grow and change. In fact, in some ways, they excel our capacity in that, because we stop growing after a while. Though it does seem like my nose gets bigger every year. Thank goodness it isn't a matter of proportion. I put Pinocchio to shame. But a tree, like if you take the giant sequoias in Central California, they continue to grow as long as they live. But they have just a vegetable existence. We are not only capable of change and motility, we are motivated to do so. So we are creatures that are impelled by desires. And we are creatures that can look at objects in the external world, even limited to clairvoyance of the physical world. We can look at it and we can get a mood or a feeling of what a setting is like. And we can take interest in it, and we can be impelled toward it, or we can be repulsed from it and have to run for the very continuance of our physical existence. So we have a sentient life, a life of emotions and feelings. And we have feelings that are attitudes even about our etheric state. Meaning to say, if we're all fagged out, we just don't have the energy to go anymore, and we're limp and flaccid, we have a feeling about that. Whereas other times we have more than just a feeling of vim and vigor, there's an attitude about it. In fact, sometimes that attitude can exceed our vital capacity, and we then have a manic state where in that manic state we can drive our vital body to the point that it is completely vitiated and completely wiped out. Plus, we can look at a physical color and have a feel about it. It's obvious that the stuff of paintings has a lot of feeling about it. Now, mysticism claims, all forms of mysticism, ancient and modern, Eastern and Western, whatever religion, whatever variety, mystics claim that when one unfolds one's experience of feeling enough, one can literally see with eyes of feeling. And when that happens, it is said that we have we'll use a Western term, desire body. Something that separates us from being just vegetables by giving us interests and feelings and drives and motivations and all kinds of emotive qualities. And similarly, to the way the etheric body was taken out of the ethers and the physical body was taken out of the physical world, our emotional nature is taken out of the cosmic emotions. Everything that we do in microcosm is borrowed from the sometimes more undifferentiated macrocosm, where feelings are given for us to specialize and use in our own little way. So again, we see an interpenetration, so that in some ways our physical bodies are suspended like marionettes within our emotional or desire nature, and they're driven one way or another by the character of interest or indifference or attraction or repulsion. And on the other hand, when we go somewhere, we carry our desire nature with us, no matter where we may be, whether we're in a movie theater where there are sweeps of emotion passing through that theater. They may or may not affect us because we're carrying our own little desire body with us. So everything is suspended in us, and we are suspended in our bodies. Now, animals are motivated also. They can move here and there, and they're driven. Dogs love to chase cats. It becomes one of their desires, not all cases, but becomes one of their desires, an object that gets them to move. And sometimes an animal will run until it runs itself to exhaustion, so its desire nature is the same way. And there are animals that have sympathy. Elephants have sympathy for each other, and quite a few other animals have this motive nature. But what separates us from animals is the fact that we have mind, concrete mind. That is, we can think things through. And the mind is taken from the world of thought, or is specialized out of the world of thought, and it is our own particular adaptation of some of the thought stuff for our use. Clearly, the mind interpenetrates all of the other realms that we've spoken of, because the mind can know the truth about them. We know from the atomic bomb that we can take physical matter and turn it into energy. And we knew that in the mind before we ever did the experience in the physical. Similarly, we can deduce what the outcome of given emotional directions are going to be in the mind before we see them played out. We can predict what someone's behavior is because the mind interpenetrates the emotional nature and has sort of an underlying logic that is behind feelings or that is behind energy. Analogously, mysticism claims from experience that we even transcend concrete thinking, that we have an ideational or abstract mind. That is, we can understand universal ideas. All of the realms like the concrete mind and the desire body and the ethers and the physical are concrete things. They have beginnings and they have ends. They occupy space and they're terminal. However, ideas are universal. Ideas apply anywhere, anytime. Among the ideas that we have, according to the claims of mysticism, is one very important idea, and that is the idea of being. That there is an idea of knowing about existence. Ideas are not quite perfectly spiritual because they do have internal limitations. Like a mathematical formula, there are only some things that the higher reason will allow. Any formula has a structure. So an idea has a structure, and that is a kind of differentiation. One of the more central ideas about being is then a being. And the central idea of the abstract mind is the conception of a self as a distinct being, as a focus of something that is universal. But that idea of a being applied to things that transcend even ideas is the idea of a universal of universal beings. And so one of the ideas is the idea of God, which is closely aligned to the idea of selfhood. They're both ideas, and they both border on spirit, but they aren't the reality of spirit. They are a conception of spirit for spirit to be conscious of its beingness or of its character. Now, mysticism really begins one step beyond this in what is called, in the Western terminology, life spirit. Life spirit is the selfness of self. It is truth without limitation. It is everything so unified together that it is pure love. It is like when you get an idea, the lights go on, only it's just a pure light without having to have the idea. Now, all of these things that I'm saying are really idolatries and abominations. Because when you're speaking of life spirit, it is ineffable. Because it is undifferentiated. And because it is unconditioned, it is like nothing. And it has a quality of being empty of any association with thinghood of any kind. All right. Now this is what mystics claim humans are. We could go up higher levels than that, but fortunately we ran out of blackboard. And I run out of words when it gets to that point. So we're trying to come to experience all of this. We realize that, for example, the life spirit, when we have intuitions, those are very tiny moments, very, very tiny moments of awakening to life spirit. When we know the truth of something without the need for an explanation, and some of those intuitions might fit right inside of our thoughts and might be at the core of all of our thoughts, but we as mystics are trying to come to an awareness of the intents and the purpose of spirit for our existence, for what we are going through. This is what all of us as seekers are trying to do. We want to know the truth. We want to know what's it all about. And we want to live accordingly. We've talked a little bit about how we're different from minerals, and how we're different from vegetables, and how we're different from animals. and a little bit about how we are like Spirit that we know through the name God. But mystics claim that there are many other beings, some of lesser waking consciousness than our own, but many of greater waking consciousness. We belong to a very big family. And like all big families, brothers and sisters help each other. And we belong to something that is a grand creation. Even the divine said, wouldn't it be wonderful to do this? And tries an experimental creation. And we participate in it. But this creation is very balanced and it's very organized. It's an evolution. And everybody or all beings are participating in this grand and glorious creative activity. And in that, we're very, as far as waking consciousness, our freedom and our ability to create or to participate creatively is just beginning. And so we've been helped all along by our elder brothers. Whether you call them angels or archangels or however many hierarchies there are, we've been helped by them, and we still are helped by them. To the degree that we become autonomous, to the degree that we become eyes and creative vehicles of the purpose of the creation, to that degree we don't need to be helped. And to that degree we become helpers. But our waking consciousness is extremely limited. And so we still have a lot of evolutionary help. And it penetrates everything we do, including our daily endeavor. Every time we're doing something, we're participating, whether we know it or not, in a very tendential evolutionary creation. And things have been designed for us. And so it turns out that our creative activity, which is usually expressed in the arts, has an art that is associated with each of the realms of our evolution. So that even when we're in darkness in the physical world, when we participate in different arts, we are resonating to something deeper in our spiritual constitution. For example, relating to the physical body, we have architecture. Is that right? I'm a terrible speller. I don't know what the art is for spelling, so. With architecture, we're relating purely to the physical world, to structure, to stuff, and most of all, how stuff fills space. Architecture is all about space, and how we occupy space, how we use space, how we are protected within space, or how we express ourselves out into space. On the other hand, our body is held together, and it's formed from conceptions deep in the spirit that pass through the ethers into our physical body. And therefore, the art that has to do with making manifest is sculpture. I'll just leave sculpture right there. I want to, the less letters I put on, the less likely. misspell. So sculpture deals with how energy works its way into the physical. Even very abstract mathematical structure shows how lines of force or lines coming from the depths of space come into a form. To some extent that's in architecture, but primarily sculpture is associated with that. Now the seers claim that the world of desire, which is a totally different world from the physical world, which has the ethers and the dense physical nature, that the world of desire, the world of feeling and emotion, is a world of color. That when we experience an emotion, if we were completely aware of that emotion, we would have an inward sensation that is like the inward sensation when we see a color. If a color startles us, from the desire plane, it would be like saying it is the startlement that has produced that color. So every time that we work with color, every time we blend color, every time we try to produce an effect with color, we are working on the nature of feeling, emotion, and desire. So the art that is associated with the desire body is painting. The art that is associated with thinking is very much embedded in our language. We say that sounds true, or we say something has the ring of truth. So the quality of pitch or tone, the thought that can hold something together or the thought that can disintegrate something is a matter of tone. And so every time that we're dealing with pitch or tone, we're dealing with thought. And so supposedly music is the art, that one I know how to spell, is the art that is associated with concrete thinking. Two arts are associated with abstract thinking. One, when the very indefinite truth of life's spirit is given a general but very fleeting and universal form, that is called poetry. The other art that is associated with the region of ideational thought is the art of producing character. Because basically the self, or the nature of any divine being that becomes an individuality, a being is something that expresses character. And therefore, the art that is associated with the development of character is drama. Supposedly, since all improvisation of the highest nature that is completely unformed comes from the life spirit, the art that has the most improvisation in, that you don't need to know anything to start improvising. You can start from scratch. Like music, you have to learn something about music before you can do it. And the same thing with drawing. But the art that has to do with immediate improvisation is dance. But we won't go into that because that's way beyond what we're trying to get to. Shakespeare is both a poet and a dramatist. We have said right from the beginning that we are out for spiritual experience. And in seeking experience, it is not something like playing hide and go seek. One becomes spiritual. one grows into spirituality, it's not just something that you can put on, as Paul says, like a new change of clothes. It's something that you have to become. And to do that, we have to develop character. So, one of the reasons we have selected Shakespeare is because he's so excellent at producing character. The characters in his plays are characters that stand for themselves. Almost all of them are psychological. We're going to do some character studies, and we're going to do a lot of psychological studies in the course of these talks. We're going to look into a lot of things, and it's very rare that Shakespeare ever produces an illogical character. I can give you an example. For example, some critics say that Timon of Athens, who becomes a misanthrope, they say, Shakespeare made too shallow of a character. That's not a believable character. But they don't understand that for somebody to become a misanthrope, they have to be shallow. You see what I mean? If you really read into the depths of human character, you could not become misanthropic. And it's only when somebody has a sophomoric kind of idealism, as Timon of Athens had, that can take place. So what we're saying is that Shakespeare understood character, and he could make these characters without having to have them be too dramatically stand out. He could make them as they were. And for this reason, he's often considered a Stoic. Because, he just lays out these characters and he lets them go one way or another. But if you look deeply into what he has done, you see that Shakespeare actually loved all of his characters. And he just lets them act out their own character, and the natural consequences come to them. He didn't have to be judgmental. He didn't have to justify them. He didn't have to exaggerate, which would only distort. So, one of the reasons that we're using Shakespeare is not for something hoity-toity, but to understand character and to have good examples of character. Another reason that we're using Shakespeare is because there are some really beautiful lines in it. Very beautiful lines and some wonderful poetry. And it doesn't hurt us to immerse ourselves into things that are going to edify us. Another reason that we're using Shakespeare is because he was so many things to so many people. He has all of these outcroppings of knowledge about so many things that one begins to realize what an enormous genius. You get a realization that this is somebody that had experience on the universal nature, because there just wasn't enough time to take in that much information by pure study. Like there has to be something universal to put it all together and to be able to bring just the right thoughts to bring it through. In my grandiose and vainglorious speculation, I do like to mystically free associate. And there is a term that jazz musicians utilize. They call it a release. It's where you come to a place in the music at a chord change where you can just spin out and do your thing. And Shakespeare's filled with all kinds of releases for mystical free association, so we can have fun. You know what I mean? We're going to have a good time. Finally, the last reason we're using Shakespeare is because he chooses fundamental structures of relationship. And those fundamental structures question very existential issues. And they are of mythic nature and of mythic proportion. And they deal with the grand problems of life. You might say the conflicts and questions, but they are dealt with on such a high level that you see that the little things of life where there are struggles and likes and dislikes, how they reflect back to something universal, so that solving human problems is not dissimilar from solving mathematical problems, which are the easy problems to solve. He's getting at the point that he does. I can tease him, and it doesn't move him in the least. So we have understood a little bit of why we're using Shakespeare. Bearing this in mind, the idea of universal themes, these talks are going to be about universal mystical themes. And we're using Shakespeare to approach the mystical themes. We're not saying that Shakespeare says these things. In some cases we will. We're talking about an interweaving. We're talking about a mystical theme and a Shakespeare theme that parallels it. The choice of plays that we are going to look into is not from some literary end or from some history of Shakespeare end. We're choosing plays according to how they fit the mystical topic that we wish to deal with. And that has to be understood right away. This is not like one would do from a literature class. 20 years ago, I did talks like this on mysticism and Shakespeare, and a Shakespeare professor came to the class, and he was outraged at what I was doing, because he didn't understand it at all. He didn't understand what I was trying to accomplish, and he was duly outraged. We will do a little bit of literary study. You can't read Shakespeare without doing literary study. And I do read commentaries. I love A.C. Bradley and Samuel Taylor Coleridge, both of whom had excellent things to say about the plays. But it isn't a literature course. It is a course on mysticism with common themes from Shakespeare. So we're going to deal with a number of sub-series. And each time there is a sub-series, I'm going to give you a long lead time about which Shakespeare plays to read. And there's a reason for that. First of all, these plays are just about 400 years old. And the language has changed a great deal in 400 years. So in order to know what we're dealing with, it takes a while to familiarize yourself with the language and to acclimatize yourself to the outlooks of that period in time, and to accommodate the mind to that kind of syntactual understanding that Shakespeare had. He used English much more as a deductive rather than a descriptive language as it is now used. And you have to get used to that. Moreover, Shakespeare's language is very difficult. Some of it is written in pure poetry. And some of it is written in the aristocratic voice. Some of it is written in the common language, complete with slang that is no longer used. And then there are all of those puns. And a lot of the puns are bawdy. I mean, it gets really down in there. You know how to keep people interested in it. So there's a lot of different kinds of use of language, and it takes a while to let that all sink in. There are cryptograms, or there is crypted information in the typetext setting. We're not going to go into that because I don't know anything about that. If somebody does have information about the cryptology and wants to offer it to the class, I would be very glad if somebody did do that. In fact, I would be very glad if people would contribute to the class in various ways. We have some people that are familiar with Elizabethan music. I've been listening to it now for about a week. I have the complete works of John Dowland, and I've been listening to it sometimes for 4 hours at a time while I do light things that don't take my attention. So we do have some people that could offer some Elizabethan music, and that could show us how some of the ballads were sung, and I would really appreciate it if people did offer things. I won't look at you and tell you who it is. Another reason is to go right back to the very first thought that we mentioned, and that is mysticism is experiential. Ever since what is called the fall of humanity, which was a misconceived redirection of consciousness that was so overwhelmingly and progressively outward into materialism and into personal things, so extensive that we have lost contact with a lot of our inner spiritual awareness. Ever since then, the mystery schools and mystics have been doing everything they can to draw people out of this attachment to personal things, this attachment to materialism, this attachment to the outlook that materialism produces, so that we can, when once dissociated from too great of a sticking to the material world, that we can again take or catch our intuition and function intuitively. The mystery schools, as far back as they can be traced into history, initiated people into the mysteries through the use of dramas, mystery dramas. Because if one lives out a myth of enlightenment, or if one lives out a story, even the Christ story, as people do with the imitation of Christ, if you live in a cosmic life outside of your own, this is a way to free yourself from the attachment to your own personality, to your own ego identifications, and to see that you really can create your character and make it something different from what it is now, and that you can do so in line with the cosmos. And even though it is merely reading, if you read the plays and read them with great intensity and do put yourself into the characters, you can free yourself from personal preoccupation. One of the members who's going to be attending this class but isn't here tonight actually does that. Gets together friends and in an amateur way acts out Shakespeare plays. People sit with the books or sometimes pass the books back and forth, and they read the parts to each other. And it is always a good experience for all of the people. The fact that it is an amateur production means that it's informal, and there is no attachment to how elegantly the performance is done, but there is the amateur spirit where one is living in the idea of the character or in the idea of the drama as it unfolds, and that is all the more likely to make it a mystery drama. Unfortunately, I don't think we're going to do that with this class, because that sort of thing, if you really get into it, requires somebody of a caliber that I am not. I'm not an initiate, to say nothing of a hierophant, so I can't act out mystery dramas where people's personalities might be released in ways that approach an emotional diarrhea. That's not an easy thing. I've thought about it over the years. In fact, I've often wanted to do an astrological cosmic drama class. I would know the people that were in the class very closely, and I would have each of their horoscopes and would choose myths that would take into account the drama that each person was going through, and live it out mythically, and then change the perspective so a person could see themselves from the outside rather than only from the inside. I don't know. Maybe someday I will still want to try that. At this point, I'm a little bit queasy about doing it yet. I need a little bit more self-control. So there's plenty of lead time to read and reread the plays and to get close to them, because they are like reading spiritual books. When you go back to them time and again, you're going to see things that you didn't see before. Just recently, I was stuck in a hotel room in outside of Salt Lake City, in the suburbs of Salt Lake City. And the only reading material I had was the newspapers, which didn't go very far. And these 4 books, which constitute the first cycle we're going to go into. And so I did a lot of reading and rereading, and I was astounded at what came out of plays that I had looked at many times before. And I've recently looked at the notes from 20 years ago when I treated some of these same plays, and I can't do anything at all like I did back then. My character's altogether different now. So it will be of value to go ahead. The first series that we're going to take, or the first theme, is going to be the annual cycle. And we're going to treat the 4 turning points of the sun, and we're going to take a play and associate it with each of them. The first play that we're going to take is going to be for winter solstice. And it's going to be A Winter's Tale. See, God is interpenetrating it. The second one, for vernal equinox, we're going to use Julius Caesar. For summer solstice, we're going to use A Midsummer Night's Dream. The dreams end up in the desire bodies. This is a cosmic coincidence here. And for autumnal equinox, we're going to use Hamlet. There will be more interweaving at the solstices than there will be at the equinoxes. In fact, the summer solstice, Midsummer Night's Dream, fits so much into the mysteries that it is, you can't but believe that Shakespeare was deeply involved with initiation into the mysteries. So, titles, for everybody who wants to have titles, you have to, if you're going to be hoity-toity and tell friends that you're attending a class on mysticism and Shakespeare, the official title is The Cycles of Christ and Persephone. All right, it's there. An alternative title is The Cycles of the Life Spirit and the Etheric Flux. And if you want a pagan alternative title, it is the interplay between the Buddhic plane, the ethers, and the earth. So we have 3 different titles, and you can take the one that you like. So there will be 3 different kinds of interweavings. The parallel between the Shakespeare plays and the cycle of the seasons, and there will be a modest study of the etheric activity at the different biological and the different biological changes in the biosphere of the Earth with the changing of the seasons. And also there will be a very modest parallel study of the higher consciousness from the life spirit as it relates to the annual cycle. Those are the dominating themes. They are not going to be really long in their presentation, and usually they will come toward the end. Each of these subjects is enormously large, and I don't want to be too tediously long-winded, so the parallels will have to be very short. And the hope in all of this is that this kind of thinking about things takes in you, because I'd like to hear things back, because that's always the happiest part of it all. I don't know how long it's going to take to do each play, but it will take more than one talk per play. In most cases, it'll probably be 2 or 3 talks per play. The reason for this is, after looking at what I did 20 years ago and what I've learned since then, I'm at a serious point in my life now. What I do, I want to count. A lot of the frivolousness of young manhood is now gone. This is part of my life work. And I want to do a decent job of it, and I want to put something into it, and I hope we all get something out of it. So obviously we're not going into the play tonight. We are as far as we are going to go tonight. However, next time we are going to dive in and go to work abruptly by going into A Winter's Tale. And the first thing that we're probably going to take, the first little subtopic, is going to be an astro-psychological spiritual study of jealousy. Because jealousy is one of the main things in one of the main characters of the play. And we want to understand, if we're understanding character, we want to understand how jealousy occurs, what its modus operandi is, and we'll look at that astrologically, and we'll look at it as it develops in the character in the play, and gradually work our way into the whole discussion. And don't forget, it's 2 weeks from tonight, and we'll start at 7 instead of at 7:30, and see how that goes. Questions, statements, comments? Thank you very much. It's been a fun night. We didn't get any Shakespeare done, but we did review mysticism in a way that was totally different than the notes. But it was in the notes, but not in that form at all.